23 years ago, I attended my first demonstration of Solidworks, and it was like I knew that I was really seeing the future.
At OMAX, we make abrasive water jet equipment.
Utilize ultra-high pressure water, cut through just about any material that you can think of.
So Solidworks is our design platform for all of our mechanical design and a little bit of our electrical design. It's a strong, powerful tool that we use every day. From small machine shops to Fortune 500 companies, our technology has evolved in trying to support the diverse customer base and trying to make the machines easier and easier to use.
Solidworks is very prevalent in product design. It's the same tool we use for new engineers, people coming to the company. They learn the software very easily.
Within a day, you're productive right out of the gate.
It's been one of the fun things about working here, getting to feel like the technology is really interesting.
Thanks to Solidworks, we're able to rapidly reuse machine data, part configurations. In terms of Solidworks and OMAX in the future, well, we're certainly not going anywhere away from one another.
Looking forward to the continued advances in technology that we get from Solidworks to help us advance our technology.
Interactive models using augmented reality, identifying part numbers and components on the machines, so we see a lot of potential.
Events like 3D Experience World are the ultimate opportunity for a person to immerse themselves in the culture, in the learning, new technologies, new procedures, new vendors. It helps instill and inspire, a greater level of enthusiasm for the use of the software. Now, what I see in XDesign and the 3D Experience platform has me just as much excited today as I was 23 years ago when I first saw Solidworks. OMAX is arguably the world's leading manufacturer of abrasive water jet machining centers.
The mission of OMAX is to have a water jet machine in every shop, and to do that we need to keep advancing the technology.
Essentially, abrasive water jet machining utilizes ultra-high pressure water, cut through just about any material that you can think of.
We have a pretty diverse customer base, and it ranges from mom and pop machine shops to Fortune 500 companies.
Solidworks is a pretty integral tool to our day-to-day operation.
With all of our development of product and tooling, it allows everything to be stored and tracked and managed automatically.
If you need access to data and you're in engineering, manufacturing, marketing, purchasing, you need to be able to access these models to do your job. Solidworks PDM Professional makes that possible for us here at OMAX.
When I first came here, we had no document vault at all.
No real file or version control.
It was more difficult to see the history of the product design flowing through our system.
We made the conversion to PDM, and thank God.
To transition our data from the old vault into the new vault, and that whole process was pretty smooth and pretty seamless.
Solidworks PDM has it's just been a game changer.
Every new part we create is going to have that part number and description baked into the metadata, along with a number of other features that are handy. Being able to put in a part number and unerringly snap to it and find it, that's really key for us. We're going to live and die by the old models that we can find.
And we can integrate that CAD right into our tooling and our test equipment.
The traceability of it is so useful, and I can't imagine trying to go without it anymore.
There's a purpose for everything, and it makes our CAD data and thus the rest of the engineering processes flow ever so smoothly. SolidWorks PDM Professional has really allowed us to up our collaboration game.
The concurrent sharing of files, whether it be released or old and archived, have really solid stability.
In the technical training program here at OMAX, we also work with technical writing and the customer-facing documentation. We use the SolidWorks models that are developed by our engineering department to help compose the technical content and the drawings for our documents. We have the most current model available when we need it. We have less time interacting with the engineer and trying to find that information. So PDM is our source repository for all of the models that we need as tech writers. We have customers that look at our documentation and say, I've worked with machine tools all over the world, and you guys have the best documentation that we've seen in the machine tool industry.
PDM is a breath of fresh air.
We expect to continue to use SolidWorks to help us advance our technology.
Ciao everyone, and welcome to What's New in SolidWorks 2020. I am Gianpaolo Bassi, CEO of SolidWorks. Every year, we hear from thousands of SolidWorks users like you, and we get amazing ideas, insights, and requests for what's next. So of course we listen very closely, and then we deliver. Over this past year, you have told us you want full digital continuity, a seamless process that takes you from design to manufacturing faster than ever. You want the freedom to innovate more, and you want to work with increasingly precise simulation to reduce the risks of product failure. So we got our marching orders, and we acted on them. And we are absolutely thrilled with what's new for 2020. It's all about digitalization and integration through a connected 3D experience platform to drive faster innovation while reducing the risk of failure. In SolidWorks 2020, you'll find three main ways we are giving you the solutions you truly want and need. First, the 3D experience platform will deliver to you a connected design to manufacturing ecosystem, helping you manage every aspect of developing and delivering products, from ideation into the hands of your customers. You'll go from concept to completed product with unprecedented speed, and you'll do it easily and seamlessly with new and connected applications, both on the desktop and the cloud. We are delivering improved performance across the spectrum for stunning speed and unparalleled functionality. And finally, we are giving you streamlined workflows to accelerate time to market and reduce manufacturing costs, all while improving product quality. Get ready to dive in, discover, and get inspired by SolidWorks 2020.
Hello and welcome back to SolidWorks Live, where today we're discussing what's new in the SolidWorks 2020 portfolio. This morning, if you didn't get a chance to join us, we discussed improved performance in SolidWorks, and you should be able to go watch those videos on our YouTube channel, on Facebook, and live.solidworks.com. This afternoon, we have more topics to discuss, and I have new guests here with me. Welcome Mark Peterson from the Product Introduction team.
Hey, thanks.
Yep, Michael Steves, also from the Product Introduction team. Myself, I'm Jeremy Rigneris, and we're also joined by Eric Beatty from Omax Corporation, our customer that we've been highlighting in these demonstrations throughout the day. Welcome back, Eric.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. It's fantastic to be here.
Yeah, so if you're just tuning in, we're streaming all day. Like I just mentioned, we had a stream this morning. We're doing this one, and then in about an hour, we're going to be discussing the connected ecosystem, where we'll show many of the other products in the SolidWorks portfolio and how they're connected together through a variety of tools. But we're excited here to discuss some of the, the nitty-gritty features, just a sampling of these. We're going to cover a handful of them. If you're interested in all the other features that we're going to be releasing new in SolidWorks 2020, I encourage you to go to solidworks.com/what's new, where you can see a plethora of videos that show all these great capabilities. And likewise, starting in a few weeks, our SolidWorks resellers and partners will start having their own live events where you can go sign up. And you're a user group leader. You guys discuss what's new, right?
I am, and we'll probably be seeing across the country, if not the world, user groups also hosting meetings that highlight a lot of this new capability and functionality. And so I'd encourage viewers to go check out www.swuggen.org. That's SWUGN.org.
Okay.
To find a user group near you.
Very cool. So we just got done with lunch. Our food's digested. Have you finished digesting everything you saw this morning?
If I pass out midstream, it's because all the blood is rushing to my brain because I'm still really heady over some of the cool stuff, and I expect the excitement level to only get amped up during this session.
Yeah, Eric, you're gonna have to wait till the end to really get your socks knocked off this day.
Well, I've got these socks for it, thanks to Jeremy here.
Your SolidWorks socks?
I got my SolidWorks socks that started this whole process.
That's right. So I think to get started, Mark, you've worked on some really cool projects this year for What's New, focused on kind of where a user starts their design process. But before we get started, I should mention we're going to be moderating all of our social media channels on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter throughout the broadcast. So if you have questions, post them there. We have moderators who will be able to answer them, and they should be able to send some questions up here to us as well. So with that, Mark, where do we typically start our designs inside of SolidWorks?
Every great design starts with a great sketch. And so it makes a lot of sense that every year SolidWorks would invest a lot into this particular environment. I was super pumped to be a part of this product and this environment when we were rolling out What's New information. So, we always like to start our sketch, usually keyboard, mouse, that sort of thing. But over the past couple of years, we've seen a little bit of a departure from that. We have these touchscreen devices and that sort of thing. I've been following it very closely, and it's, sort of been working. But I think if you haven't started using a touchscreen device yet, I think maybe SolidWorks 2020 is the time to do it. So let's take a look at, just a few of the new enhancements here. So I'm going to start by creating some geometry here with the Sketch Ink capability. We've had this for a while. I simply draw a shape like that, and it creates a slot shape. What's new in SolidWorks 2020 is that if I want to create a dimension on here, typically I'd have to reach for the keyboard. Not so in SolidWorks 2020. I simply tap on the screen to designate a dimension value. So that means that I can throw away the keyboard forever. I don't have to use it anymore. So. Now, we would probably typically use our mouse for some other functions. Maybe we want to, add some relations. We can do that with touch as well. We may want to access some different commands, like a fillet or a chamfer. With the touch device, you can add those to a shortcut command bar, but with SolidWorks 2020, there's no need to. With these common commands, you just simply swipe through using a new gesture-powered option called Power Modify. Okay. So you can quickly create chamfers, you can swipe through entities to trim them back, you can create splits in your entities using an X shape, or you can extend an entity by just simply swiping with your touch-enabled pen. Even to more advanced things, like if you wanted to double stroke through an entity, you can create an offset like so.
That's very fluid. I mean, it's just watching you live doing that. It's very organic, kind of just jump in, easily navigate around. What else new do we have?
Yeah, I feel it's great. And if maybe you're doing a little bit more kind of industrial design, you want some nice swoopy shapes. We introduced some different options in the past, like curvature continuity. Well, now we make that even better. So here we can show tangency, curvature continuity, and finally G3 continuity, which makes the back of this cover very, very smooth, as you can see from the zebra stripes here.
Sure.
And then finally, we've made the redo command more robust. If you got a little too liberal with your undo, you might accidentally undo out of a sketch, which could maybe cause you to lose some work. So now we've made the redo command more robust, which means that you can redo back into that sketch and you won't lose any work.
Yeah, not just going back into it. It's like you're actually re-entering the edit sketch command and really going back. So yeah, I've run into that myself where I've just hit undo a few too many times and you get right out of it.
That's right.
Now, Eric, you are on the SolidWorks user forums quite a bit. You've probably seen G3 curvature continuity. A lot of users are going to be excited about that.
Oh, very much so, very much so. That, in some ways, I think that's been one of the holy grails for folks, to want to appear in the software. So I'm sure there's a lot of champagne corks popping around the world at this very moment.
Sure. Also, touch devices. So, what's your experience using touch devices?
I haven't used them so much on desktop SolidWorks, but I've been using them on the 3D Experience platform for over a year and a half now, and I've kind of been chomping at the bit, saying when are these type of tools going to become more robust inside my desktop SolidWorks? I mean, I'm actually old enough that I started my career on the drawing board with pencil and paper, and so I'll often find myself as I'm planning out my sketch, just kind of going through the hand motions, and now finally maybe this isn't so symbolic anymore and I can put it back to use.
Yeah, no need for T-squares protractors here, right?
Yeah.
No.
Not only that, you not only showed how you can sketch with a pen device, but you're also showing really great productivity tools with those power modify capabilities, really creating shortcuts for those things like offset and so forth. So.
Right. It means that you don't have to use a mouse. You don't have to, set up, special shortcut menus and stuff and tap everywhere. You just do it with the pen. It feels very natural and fluid.
Sure. So we can start a design with a sketch, but there's other ways we can start designs too, right?
Yeah, for instance, if I was looking at this cup here, I could 3D scan it to start reverse engineering it, or if I'm grabbing a part that's been out in service for a long time, I can't even find drawings for it. Sure. How do I reverse engineer this type of thing? So at OMAX, are you guys doing any work there for bringing in other types of data or starting parts that aren't from sketches?
If we're doing something like that, especially with mesh type geometry and STL files, maybe it's something that's been, downloaded off a vendor site, and we can't perhaps get the best file format, or a preferred one. So, it's something we need a more robust set of tools, because what has been available in the past,
Yeah, and it's something that we've been improving over the years too, with things like 3D Interconnect, bringing in mesh geometry and being able to actually edit it. And I think we've made some great improvements there with 2020. But one other challenge I've seen before is like if I've got a point cloud data set, a lot of information, I can bring it as a graphics, that's great, but I want to do more than that. And I think 2020 addresses that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a 3D scan here that was taken with an Artec 3D Space Spider. This particular gear has 500,000 facets, which is
a lot of geometry, right?
It's a huge amount, and it's not just a huge amount for SolidWorks, it's a huge amount for any software program, any computer. It just takes a lot of computation to crunch through all that. Well, SolidWorks 2020 introduces decimation, which allows you to simplify this model by reducing the number of facets in an intelligent way. So we just specify the amount we want it to be reduced by, and in this case 50%, and that makes it twice as easy for the CPU to crunch through this type of data. Of course, this workflow doesn't stop there. Typically what we want to do with something like this is create an idealized version of this gear. So we're going to use some new tools in SolidWorks 2020, like this Tangency facet select tool, which allows me to select the facets that I want for this axis that runs down the center of the geometry. Also new in SolidWorks 2020 is the capability to do planes and axes with faceted geometry. Now, after we've completed the idealized geometry, of course, we want to compare it to the initial mesh geometry. And so with body compare, as shown here, we can see sort of a heat map of, maybe some features that I missed or some damaged areas of the original mesh that I actually want to make sure that I didn't include in the idealized geometry.
That's really cool. I mean, Michael had mentioned we've enabled ways for you to start leveraging mesh geometry with mesh bodies is one of the things that we introduced a few years ago. You can kind of come in and reference that. Your ability to now add reference geometry to that makes that easier to mate that into place. But I like your story of how to create the idealized geometry, SolidWorks shapes and features. But what if I don't want to spend that kind of time? We have some other new features that you were alluding to, some modify capabilities.
Yeah,
right?
so with 2020, we can open up STL files. They come in as mesh bodies. It's not just graphical information. We actually have the bodies that we can work with. And we did some work here in 2019. And in 2020, we expanded the number of features that we can do to do some direct editing on these mesh bodies.
Delete holes.
Delete holes, fillets, chamfers. I mean, really,
my favorite inclusion is knit surface, because that really means you can take the powerful surfacing capabilities of SolidWorks and really apply them to make a solid watertight body.
Yeah, you use trimming operations too to cut away at the model, and I mean, do a lot of work to, rather than having to recreate it from the ground up, just referencing a mesh, you can just edit the mesh and be done.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we actually had a question come in while we were talking about mesh, about the previous topic with the touch devices. Tim Meskers asks, will the touchscreen functionality also work with Wacom-like drawing tablets? And Mark, do you have any feedback on that?
I believe so, but there's a lot of different types of Wacom tablets. So, but again, as long as Windows recognizes the drivers for your touch device, then it definitely works. So, it is worth testing. I didn't test it myself, but we know that Wacom has tight integration with SolidWorks already. So,
yeah, in fact, if anybody follows what we've done at SolidWorks World in the past, not this past year, but the year before, I was touring the product showcase and got a chance to meet with the folks from Wacom, and we did a lot of touch interaction with one of their big tablet devices. It was really cool opportunity for me to see how some of this touch capability works. They even have some really cool stuff where they even go above and beyond too. So, because they've got their dial thing and stuff like that. So,
any other questions, Jeremy? Or I've got a different type of mesh I want to talk about.
Okay, what kind of mesh do you want to talk about?
All right, so in the previous session, we talked a little bit about SolidWorks simulation, some of the performance improvements there, giving people the flexibility of the mesh order that they want to use, if it's draft quality or high quality mesh. And with SolidWorks 2020, SolidWorks Simulation 2020, we've expanded what we can do with these mesh types, specifically solid shells, and I really want to focus on beams. Before I show anything here, let's just talk about OMAX a little bit, because we've seen this data set a little bit. We have that tilt-a-jet head that moves around on the XY on that system, and obviously if I want to make sure I'm cutting a good part, it's important that it's exactly where it thinks exactly where it is, where the computer's telling it to be, right?
Sure.
But there's a lot of energy that's created. Are there thermal issues that we should be aware of here?
Oh, very much so. As you just mentioned, that water jet, as the water's leaving the nozzle, it's traveling 1.5 times the speed of sound. It's dumping a lot of energy in the form of heat into that catcher tank. That heat radiates to the tank, to the frame structure, up to the XY bridge assembly. And because of thermal expansion and those issues, especially on the Micromax, which is our most precise machine, we want to be doggone sure that nozzle is exactly where the computer is telling it to be and where it believes it is. So definitely thermal issues are a big concern for us, so much so that we even offer an accessory chiller system to hold that water temperature at a prescribed amount, just to ensure that everything is thermally stable.
So it's really interesting, and we have ways to solve this today, but we've been kind of limited on the ways we can look at this type of an analysis.
Yeah, so
right?
when we received Eric's data set, I was looking at setting up a study like this, in 2019 and before, I could use solid elements to mesh all these components together and be able to run that thermal analysis like a thermal transient analysis, see how long it's going to take to get to a certain temperature, if it levels out, and even use those thermal loads in a static study to get the thermal stress and displacement, so we can actually see, okay, is there much displacement at that tilt-a-jet head? But that required kind of a lot of computational resources, because as you'll see in just a moment with the model, there's a lot of long profiles, thin walls. Are we going to use shells? Can I use beams? I really couldn't before, but in 2020 I can. So let's take a look at what this assembly looks like, right? So we have some of this mounting hardware to hold these long beams in place. Again, traditionally I'd have to solve them as solids, but now in 2020 I can leave them as beams and apply loads like temperatures and have these thermal loads go through the connection of these parts, multiple types of meshes that are going on here that support this type of physics. So we can set that up in a thermal study to be able to calculate the thermal loads that I described, the thermal result, how hot is something going to get. Do we need to add in the OMAX chiller option if we're reaching some of these operational conditions? And we've had this capability for a long time, taking the thermal results from a thermal study and using them as a thermal load in a static study. So again, here we're able to calculate the stresses and displacements to see, okay,
how is heat causing these parts to kind of warp and bend? And
so we can, before we even build the Micromax in this case, we can see for a predetermined operating time, when are we going to have thermal concerns?
Oh, right on, and that could possibly help drive some different material choices so that rates of coefficients of expansion are much more aligned, and thus we potentially avoid those situations.
Absolutely. And one thing that's also powerful, and this has been long in there, if you're using, well, we know this for determining these types of meshes, you can go in and manually pick and choose which mesh type you want for a given part or body. But if you're using sheet metal, automatically converted to shell elements, and if you're using weldments, they're automatically converted to beams. I think speaking of weldments, we have some powerful enhancements with the weldment structure system with 2020.
Yeah, so Eric, do you guys create weldments at OMAX?
The vast majority of our catcher tanks, the most dominant feature that you see on the machines is that large tank are all manner of weldments, and
small, simple weldments.
Some are,
big?
but when you think about our largest machine is probably as long as an Olympic-sized swimming pool and a couple lanes wide.
It's pretty complex at that point.
Indeed, water is 8 pounds per gallon, no matter where on the planet you are, and that's a heck of a lot of weight you gotta hold in.
So are you guys using some of the weldment capabilities in SolidWorks today?
We are, but one of the things about using the weldment feature is that you need a 3D sketch, and I know a lot of folks that they turn as white as this desktop when you ask them to create a 3D sketch, and their hands start trembling so much that touch gestures wouldn't be useful at all. So,
well, Mark, I think you have a prescription for their trembling, right?
Right.
We actually introduced a really cool way to avoid creating 3D sketches, right?
That's right, and it's called structure system. So you can think of it as a really large weldment as far as scale goes. And the power of structure system ultimately is that you don't necessarily have to have a line for every single member of the weldment, I guess you could say. You can just create members between points, between lines, between planes, that sort of thing. So they're very easy to build up. Now, with SolidWorks 2019, we were able to pattern the welded structures around. However, they lost a little bit of intelligence if you would pattern them, which meant that automated trimming and that sort of thing would have been a little bit wasn't there, and so you have to do the manual trimming. Now in SolidWorks 2020, the patterned structure systems are also still structure systems, so they keep that intelligence. Furthermore, that means that you can put structure systems in between those patterned structure systems, and that maintains the automated trimming and all of that.
So this really expands on some really great capability that we introduced last year.
Yeah, and there's some familiarity here too. In terms of selecting weldment profiles, positioning them, you have some of these
very similar to weldments.
Similar, yeah, but there's also some very nice conveniency features in weldment in this weldment environment, you can add multiple types of profiles in at once. So you don't have to create separate weldment features or just in the weldment structure system to do the work you need to do.
Yeah, so I mean, this is great new enhancement in SolidWorks 2020. I think if people are unfamiliar with structure systems, they can actually go back and see the videos for what's new last year to kind of see how this was created. Or I believe when they go to the live reseller events, they'll get a little refresher on what structure systems are, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so in a matter of minutes, we've been able to create this complex weldment structure.
Yeah, I mean, reproducing tons and tons of geometry, utilizing patterns. So.
Well, and OMAX, I mean, you guys use a lot of patterns, reuse of a lot of components. I mean, especially in some of your product lines, you have common family of parts to optimize the design, optimize the cost, really, for you and the customer who use some of your design. So in terms of like bolts, some of the components there on Micromax, I mean, obviously when we were looking at it, patterns were used.
Oh, indeed, indeed. I mean, we fully populate our models, so every nut, bolt, washer, screw, they're all in there. And so, again, you know, we're using a lot of hole features, a lot of patterns, you know, leveraging it as much as possible because, you know, I've tried to get them to pay me by the mouse click or the you know, the mate made, but they just won't have it. So I need to work more efficiently, I guess.
Yeah, we're going to dive in. We're going to take a look at patterns. We just had a question come in while we're still on the topic of structures, and this is a great question. Jason Capriotti asked, does structures replace weldments? And the answer is no. It's just a different way of looking at more highly complex weldments is a different way of thinking of it. It's definitely a streamlined way when your weldments start to get to a certain level of complexity. They still create structure elements, cutless items, just like you're familiar with inside of weldments. Definitely not a replacement for it.
Yeah, and you still have, in SolidWorks 2020 and before, I mean, you still have the same weldment feature that you know and love.
Great question out there. But we started talking about patterns. We started talking about the fact that you guys use fasteners throughout. I have some things that I think OMAX will really appreciate here. I'd like to go over. When you create hole wizard holes, there's an option to create hole wizard holes using a 3D sketch, and you can create holes on multiple faces. Now, a lot of people avoid this because if they want to create derived patterns, that causes problems. You end up having to skip instances, things like that. Well, in SolidWorks 2020, we've actually supported the ability to create a component-driven pattern or a derived pattern using hole wizard holes, and SolidWorks understands the orientation of the hole wizard holes. So in this case, we had counterbores on both sides of the parts, and you'll notice that the fasteners aligned properly. Now, you can always set that back if you want to go to the other way. So it's a great way to quickly use those. But when it comes to linear and circular patterns, you guys create any of these?
Oh, indeed. And in fact, I believe on the part we're seeing right now, that particular bolt pattern, some of those slots are slightly skewed so that it can only go together one way. And
yeah,
so
in fact, we can now modify the individual instances of component pattern instances just like you can in the feature pattern for this. So linear and circular patterns. But now I want to talk about mirroring components. You have some parts in here that they weren't quite symmetric parts. Well, this creates a challenge when you go to mirror these components. We've always had the option to mirror using the bounding box or geometry, but on a non-symmetric part, that creates a bit of a misalignment.
yeah.
There's a new option now to mirror about component origin where it uses the origin of the component as the mirror surface.
Oh, right on.
And we also improved the UI. We got rid of that next click box down there with some buttons.
I just noticed that. It looks like it's all encapsulated on that single pane there.
Yeah, so this way you're not trying to go, well, what options do I have for orientation? I can just go ahead and click one. So these are
exciting.
Yeah, patterns are a great productivity enhancement tool, and improving those is always going to be good.
Yeah, and this is a big collaboration enhancement in my perspective because, I mean, as Mark or Jeremy, you guys create parts, and I'm putting these together, I don't necessarily know how you created those parts. You may have created them in context of a separate assembly that's not around the same, position. So when I come in to bring it in mind, try and mirror it, it's putting it almost off in space. But this new option to mirror about the origin eliminates that.
Yeah, it really makes Mirror super robust inside of an assemblies.
Yeah, for sure.
So you know, we've shown you some pretty good stuff here, but I think we have a big surprise for you, Eric.
Well,
You
I'll
can
admit,
see off screen what we're going to show.
I can see the preview monitor. So
so we have something really exciting here that I think a
Yep.
lot of people are really excited to discuss new in SolidWorks 2020 when it comes to a new type of way of creating components.
Yeah, and this is something I was able to preview earlier this year at World. There's so much potential of what you can do with this. Let me just back up a little bit. Over 10 years ago, when I first started getting into SolidWorks, and you learn how to do some sketching, you got to do some basic extrusions kind of stuff that we saw earlier. Then you get into sweeps and lofts, and if you're like me, one of the first things that you created was a spring. And then you learn that I can put that spring into an assembly. We can edit it in context, so that I can say, well, the spring starts here and it ends over here, and in the assembly, when this plate moves, the spring will update and change and dynamic, right?
Yeah.
You can make it living. It's alive. But as you get getting into industry and seeing other customers and how they're using that type of functionality, you quickly learn that when you have multiple instances of that kind of flexible part or that dynamic part, you need to do more management of it, right? You need to create configurations. Maybe you do some virtual components. Maybe you create separate parts entirely, so that it quickly becomes more difficult to manage. I mean, at OMAX, taking a look at that Micromax machine, we have bellows. We have multiple things that flex. So how have you done that at OMAX?
Configurations, and because for example, those bellows, they're used on a lot of our machines, and we like to show a lot of different XY positions for our bridge locations. If you were to open one of those bellows models and jump over the configuration tab, you'd see a list just growing and growing.
And that's just one machine.
That's just one machine.
We looked at this machine when we opened it up, that XY, you had 6 different positions for bellows, and you had 3 different positions for each of those for different XY. You're talking about 24 different configurations just for that one machine?
Yep.
So how do we solve this?
So 2020, I believe, solves this. It solves it very well, so that you don't have to worry about configurations. You can just insert the component and use a new tool called Make Part Flexible. So let's take a look and see how this works. So taking a look at the Tilt-A-Jet, we talked a little bit about in the last session, but just to recap here, the Tilt-A-Jet pivots the head. We got some articulation going on so that you can cut faster. Right, you can also eliminate the draft that is created on that cut edge. So you have square edges on your part. You're creating parts just like you want. And we're able to visualize and validate this flexibility using a feature that's been around for years, flexible sub assemblies. Right, so you don't have to put all these components together all at the top level. You can still utilize sub assemblies and make them all flexible, like what we have done with the Tilt-A-Jet. But the design's not finished. Garnet gets everywhere, that abrasive material. So to protect that, Garnet finds a way. So to protect that, right, you use bellows, O-rings to protect some of these important linkages in this case. Well, with that bellows, we want to make it flexible. And 2020 makes this easy with the dedicated feature, Make Part Flexible. It opens up, gives you the list of the external references, you remap them, click OK. So in this case, I just had to click the cylindrical face to remap that external reference, and the model updates and continues to update with every move of the assembly.
Wow. So here's the real challenge, though. You have another bellows on there.
Yeah, so notice how the other one hasn't been changing.
Right.
Similar to flexible sub-assemblies, Make Part Flexible is unique to each instance. So I can just simply apply it here to the other instance, and it updates as you would expect, right?
Completely independently of one another.
And as you take a look at some of the other examples here, I mean, for living hinges, bellows, baffles, boots, skaters, I mean, springs, of course. It really makes it really makes it easy. So, taking a look at how these parts are built, you could create a library of these flexible components that you may use, like what we've done with the bellows. But you just really need a part that has these external references already in it. Insert it into another assembly, make part flexible, and it gives you a list of those external references. So you can remap the ones that you need so it rebuilds properly in the assembly.
So no more 24 configurations on a single bellows file.
I tell you, and that's a small configurations list there. This is probably easily one of the things that I'm most excited about because I'm
speechless.
I'm speechless. Yeah, I truly am. That is some phenomenal technology applied right there. It might seem trivial to some folks, but for some of the applications that we've got to show off our models in their best form, that's a lifesaver, a game changer.
Yeah, and this isn't just important when we're talking about just creating extra data within a file. It spills over into data management. How are you going to manage those additional configurations?
Spills over to bill of materials as well, because one of the things is like that part that we saw there was the exact same part, multiple instances of it. So when you create a bill of materials of that, like a full flattened bill of materials, or if they're all in the same assembly, they show up as one part.
Yeah. And the PDM administrator, when I put that hat on, I'm only managing one file.
That's right.
And I'm only managing one configuration tab on my data cards.
Yeah. So I'm going to keep an eye here, see if any questions come in, but we've kind of covered a smattering of some of the new Streamlined Workflows features in SolidWorks 2020. There's a lot more to look at. Another example along the lines of this I really like are we now have alternate position views for parts, so that's something new. Lots of other things. So I mentioned it at the beginning of the show. Make sure you go to solidworks.com/what's new. There's a ton of videos there that you can watch, see all this. Sign up for a local SolidWorks reseller event. Go see this in person and ask questions. Some of these things you may want to understand some of the little details in here.
Yeah, it'll be interesting when you take a look at the forums, the SolidWorks forums, to jump on there, because that's where I got a lot of these ideas of where people wanted to use this flexible part specifically. It'll be interesting to see what people create now.
So not so much a question, but we have SolidWorks Nerd says, I assume making a part flexible will be useful for animations as well. Woot woot. Absolutely, I agree 100%. I've done it in the past. I made a 32 valve V8 engine and I had to have a different configuration for every one of those valve springs in there. So should definitely make that process a lot easier. In fact, if you want to get really crazy, you can turn on Instant 3D and even update this stuff
dynamically. Right? So, with Instant 3D, as you change a dimension or a mate distance,
it'll update.
It updates automatically or real time as you're making those changes. Yeah, indeed. And sure enough, when you create an animation of that in SolidWorks, it updates each frame, works exactly how you would expect. Wow. Similar to what people have shown off in years before, but now it's easy to insert multiple instances of them and tie them up.
All right, with that, I think we're going to wrap up. A few housekeeping items. We're not done yet. We have one more segment we're going to cover in about a half an hour, it looks like, at 2 p.m. Eastern. We're going to discuss the connected ecosystem. We're going to look at a lot of other SolidWorks products in the portfolio, how they connect together, how we can leverage some cloud tools as well. If you didn't get a chance this morning, we discussed improved performance, some really great stuff there you got excited about with drawing. So
indeed.
If you didn't get a chance to watch that, go back and check it out. And make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube and like us on Facebook so you get notified when these videos go live. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks,
We'll
Jeremy.
see you in the next one.
See you soon.